Hey guys, Fallen Messiah here with another Diablo 4 video. I haven't made this kind of video for a little while now, and with Season 8 more than halfway through, Season 9 being on the horizon, and the 2-year anniversary of the game, I thought what better time than now to take a bit of a pause and reflect on everything that's going on in the game. But before that, just to give you some context in case this is your first time on my channel. Who exactly am I, and why should you even care about my opinion? I'm Fallen Messiah. I'm a lifelong fan of Diablo franchise, going all the way back to playing Diablo 1 on my old PlayStation 1. I spent my entire high school basically just playing Diablo 2, and now I'm here after all these years currently playing Diablo 4, making content, build guides, and more. This is my favorite gaming franchise. I've played and loved every Diablo game to date. So that is sort of my perspective and the place I'm coming from when I make these kind of videos. And also, if you've never been on the channel before, I am a no-nonsense kind of person. I will only say what I believe is truth. And I have no desire to sugarcoat anything for you guys, because I don't think it accomplishes anything. My only goal and motivation is to make an already great game better. So, with all of that in mind, some things that I say in this video might feel a little bit harsh, but ultimately that is the position where I'm coming from, and that is what I aim to do. Now, there are 3 main topics that I will cover in this video. First, I want to talk a little bit about my PTR experience in Season 9, and about PTR in general as well. I played a lot of PTR, not just Season 9, but also previous seasons as well. I made lots of guides, and I want to touch upon that first. Second main topic will be Season 8, the current live season. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And my final topic will be the actual future of the game. Where do I think it's heading, and what is my perspective and expectation for the game going forward? Sounds a lot? It is. I could have made this one video into 3 separate ones, but there are 2 main reasons why I chose not to do that. The main reason is that my audience is still just not big enough, and I don't want to saturate you guys with these videos. Instead, I aim to make every video as impactful as it can be. The second one is that I feel that by making just one video, it will be a lot more cohesive, as all of these topics are intertwined and they're relevant to one another. So with that said, it's going to be a longer video, guys. I can't help it, as there is a lot to talk about. But as always, there will be timestamps down below, so you can skip ahead to a specific section that you're interested in. And lastly, if you like this kind of content, hit that sub and like button, because it really helps me a ton, as these videos take a long time to make. Alright, no more dilly-dallying, let's get straight into it. Alright guys, let's talk about the PTR first. So specifically, what is the point of the PTR? The point of PTR is to receive feedback, right? So PTR is a public test realm. It's a test server where we as players are meant to test the builds, everything new from the patch, all the changes, so that we can kind of like tell Blizzard, okay, this works, this doesn't work. So thanks to the PTR, Blizzard has a lot of data they can use to then make necessary adjustments, nerfs, buffs, etc. The whole point of a PTR is for Blizzard to provide us the most seamless experience they can, so that we spend as little time as possible and we just get straight into it and we test things out for them. That's the point of the PTR. So for Blizzard to receive feedback and for the players to get in early on the action and sort of serve as testers for Blizzard. PTR is especially useful for people like me who love tinkering with different build guides, who love theory crafting, and the ability to jump in early and then kind of see what works and what doesn't work, you know, and to see how the build plays is very valuable to me. Now there is something we have to talk about. Previously, I have given Blizzard a lot of leeway when it comes to things like, you know, the PTR experience, but we are now 9 seasons in. We are now 2 years into this game, and there are still some things with the PTR in general that's just not good enough. Like, for example, some caches give ancestrals now, like for example, you know, the class uniques are all ancestral, that's great. Others don't. The non-class unique cache doesn't give ancestrals necessarily, it's random, so sometimes you get an ancestral, sometimes you don't. Why? Bit levels also don't unlock. Why? You know, it's things of these nature. Like for example, when I jump into the PTR, you know, and I want to, for instance, I was testing out Thibault's Will for my Hydra Sorcerer, just to see if that's gonna work. And I had to open dozens upon dozens upon dozens of these unique caches because we don't have a guaranteed ancestral. And again, this is a PTR, this is not a live game. And then, when I want to test this into the pit, I actually have to go through pit level 10, 20, 30, 40, all the way up to, say, 80s and 90s. I have to grind this out, which, maybe it doesn't take too much time, but it still takes time. All of these things still take hours out of your time that we could have been spending doing something else, like actually testing these builds. Here's something else. Merc levels also don't unlock as well. And we also don't get the bartering coins either when we apply all boosts, which is, not the biggest deal in the world, but it's still something that we should be having. And then, okay, so PTR, some bugs are to be expected, that's fine, I can work with Blizzard, on these things, but it's still worth mentioning that, for example, the newest item, the Hand of Naz, which is necessary for the newest Archmage Summoner Necro that I also have a build on, this item, you couldn't find it in the Class Unique cache. And then I had to use Obols in the hopes of getting a good item. And all of these things, just add up very quickly. But none of them, of course, come even close to, masterworking, tempering, and enchanting, which are, trust me, just as annoying in the PTR as they are in the live version. If you never actually engage with the PTR, you might think it's not so, because, you have unlimited gold, unlimited mats, but trust me, it's just as annoying, if not more. For example, if you want a good amulet, and you're trying to get that passive, you're trying to enchant the amulet, well, good fucking luck with that, I remember I wanted to get Envenom, the passive for the druid among the amulets to test, and I just kept hitting Enchant over and over and over and over and over. This took half an hour. And then I get it, and of course what happens, I miss it, and I just, like, I'm fuming at this point, right? This is something that happens in a live game, but it's just one of those systems that don't really work as intended, but they are especially annoying in the test service, in the test realm, where these things just shouldn't be there to waste your time. Masterworking as well. Double critting, triple critting, something you want, good luck with that. Tempering, you can absolutely break your items in the PTR, and then you gotta get a new one. Like, these things take hours out of your time, and it's completely unnecessary. Like, this is just not a good experience. We are 2 years in, we are 9 seasons in, and these things just keep happening, and I just don't think that's acceptable. So, if anything, I'm not going to propose some big sweeping changes on masterworking or enchanting or tempering, but I will say, as far as the PTR is concerned, again, the point of PTR is not me spending 10 hours to get a build online. The point is for me to get it online within 1 hour so I can immediately start testing that. This is better for me, this is better for Blizzard. So at the very least, give us some kind of user interface, a new UI, whatever, where I can simply select an item, select stats, select masterworking, select affixes, the values, and everything, and bam, I'm good to go. If you ever tried making your own build on Maxroll or D4 Planner or wherever, you know how it works. You select an item and then you select the stats and then you manually select the masterworkings. Why can't we have something similar on the PTR? I'm just wasting so much time when I could be doing pretty much anything else. Like, to get a single build online, for example, like the one you're seeing right now on your screen, it takes me, like, at the very least, 5, 6, 7 hours, if not more, and this is absolutely not necessary. So just a little bit of a rant when it comes to the, overall PTR experience, which can be, and should be, a hell of a lot better. Alright guys, so now that I've kind of ranted about, the PTR and how things could definitely be a lot better in that testing environment, let's jump straight into Season 9, the new things that we've seen here, and what's my general feedback and opinion regarding that. So the problem about these new escalating dungeons is that, well, they're just not escalating. This is a point that other content creators have already mentioned, for example, Vudijo, for sure. But I feel it's worth repeating. The problem is, of course, is that all the builds that currently crush Tournament 4 are absolutely going to crush the escalating dungeons as well. So if you have a build that can go easily into the pits 80 and 90, for example, the one that you see on your screens right now, and if you go to these escalating dungeons, you're just going to absolutely destroy them. Which in theory is okay, but if you mention the word escalating, you kind of assume that the difficulty, ramps up to the point where it's going to be really hard, but that doesn't really happen. On top of that, all these modifiers that you have in these escalating sigils do not carry over, but are kind of like, what's the point? If you have, for example, one good affix and one bad affix on one of them, and you have another good affix and another bad affix, they should stack, right? So in the end, the final level should be something really crazy. Ideally, what I would personally do is like, why stop at 3? Let's make 10 levels so we can go through with the final level be having like 10 different positive affixes and 10 different negatives and ending up being insane, like crazy, kind of like the last level on the Infernal Horrors, except, a lot harder in difficulty. That's something personally that I would love to see, from these escalating dungeons, so that they actually do escalate as opposed to, well, what they do now. Still, it's better for us to have them than not have them. These changes are going to make the Nightmare Dungeons better, and the affixes and the rewards in general from these dungeons are also just a little bit better than they used to be. Thumbs up from that. But other than that, again, difficulty is just not there. This is just going to be relegated to another one of these Torment 4 contents that you're gonna be crushing on a regular basis, and it's not really an endgame in the true sense of that word. And I will talk a little bit about what endgame means to me, in later portions in the video. So that's just kind of where these escalating dungeons stand. I think they're a decent mechanic, but they could definitely be a hell of a lot better, that's for sure. As far as Astaroth is concerned, I think he's pretty cool. I like him. I'm a big fan of the concept of taking existing things in the game that have worked well, existing assets, and then using them in a different way, kind of freshening them up. And that's what they did, and it makes perfect sense. Astaroth is one of the most memorable bosses in the campaign, so why not use him in some capacity? It's an existing asset that you already have, so you don't have to spend too much development time to kind of freshen him up and put him into the live game. So, big fan of that. I like Astaroth. Of course, he suffers from same issues, Eventually, we will reach a point where he will no longer feel fresh and where we're going to be just one-shotting or two-shotting Astaroth. That's just the nature of where the game is at this moment. But, as far as I'm concerned, Astaroth definitely gets a plus for me. Now let's talk about these Horagic storerooms. I'm not sure, are they gonna be permanent mechanic? I'm not sure, is this just a Season 9 thing? I'm generally not the biggest fan of them. So they're basically like these hidden rooms where you have this timer of, I believe it's 2 minutes, and then you accumulate kills. Very similar like Infernal Hordes. Although I find them to be a lot more boring. I don't think we need another mechanic like that, to be quite honest. Timer should be lowered to 1 minute, or perhaps even removed, because I feel like it kind of interrupts the flow of you just, rushing through these dungeons, and then you come to a full stop and you have to spend 2 minutes into, in a single room. I think this concept should be redesigned. So overall, just not a big fan of that. And I do like this Boon Bane modifier that we have from the Hordes. We also had them in the Root Hold Caverns in Season 7. Before the storerooms, you go in and you pick, these different affixes. I just feel they would be better served if they were a part of a Nightmare Dungeon. So what do I mean by that? My idea would be to scrap the storeroom idea completely, and instead you can hide these little kind of shrines in these Nightmare Dungeons, and then these shrines can have these affixes, and some of them are positive and others are negative, and they further juice up the escalating dungeons going forward. You have these affixes on the sigils, but this is just an extra modifier that you can throw in on top of them. That would be my idea. If we scrap these storerooms completely and we kind of add these modifiers as a little secret that you can find. Okay, and now let's talk to the bread and butter of Season 9, which are the seasonal powers / mechanics. So, I like them in theory. I was actually really excited when I was watching the campfire chat, when I saw the devs explaining how you can make your own spells and everything. But in practice, the truth is that they are of very little consequence, actually. When I was making these builds, for example, let's say this Hydra build, my immediate thought was, oh, okay, so these anomalies they have a summon tag, so they can actually be used to boost my passive to get even more summon damage. But what ended up being is that they actually didn't count towards primordial binding stacks for whatever reason, but the little wolves that you summon from the rune words, they do stack, but these summons don't stack. So even one of these things that they actually could prove to be very useful on, they didn't work. Just in general, they're cool in theory, but the choice of Catalyst and choice of Effusion generally doesn't end up really mattering all that much, to be completely honest. Whenever I was assembling a build, I was just going with what felt right based on the vibes on the build, but not really giving it too much thought, It's not nearly as impactful, as powerful as current live season powers are, where, for example, you can slap Hatred's Embraces Haste, I think it's called, and you get 50 extra crit strike chance on Paragon 200. It makes an immediate impact on your build. And then you can use other affixes in this slot where you would usually put crit strike chance, to put something else. It creates an immediate impact, and none of the powers in Season 9 have nearly that kind of impact on the builds. I hope that maybe they can bring this up a little bit, because right now I feel they're absolutely not impactful whatsoever. It's basically like, whatever. Pick and choose something that feels the most cool to you, but generally speaking, it's just not impactful as far as the gameplay is concerned. There is this very delicate balance between making the seasonal powers too powerful and making them not powerful enough, and it's not easy to kind of find just the right balance for that. But as far as I'm concerned, in Season 8, the current live season, I feel they are just right. They're not too overpowered, and they're not underpowered. They should be impactful. The whole point of seasonal powers is for them to be impactful, and I'm just not getting that from the seasonal powers in Season 9. If they're already here and they're not impactful, then what's the point? That's just kind of how I feel about that. So ultimately, I definitely feel they fall short compared to the live version to Season 8, and they absolutely fall even shorter to Season 7. I'm a big fan of the witch powers there. I think Season 7 was the best one so far overall, and witch powers there were amazing. So this is definitely a step down as far as seasonal mechanics are concerned. And there's also a return of legendary gems too, which are nice. I'm a big fan of that. They add additional flavor to the mechanics, but again, they're just not really super impactful. I do like some of them. I like the Cheat Death gem. I will definitely be using that. There's some other cool ones. For example, the Jewel Guardians, which are very reminiscent of the Nemesis Bracers in Diablo 3, where you kind of have these extra mobs in your pit that you can spawn, even though these spawn randomly. So these are cool, but ultimately, again, not really impactful. Alright guys, so with PTR in Season 9 out of the way, let's talk about Season 8 now, the live current season that we're playing right now. So having played Season 8 and been playing it, almost daily, this is kind of my review and the points that I'm going to be talking about. So let's start with the story first. I know most people probably are not going to care too much about this. I know I'm probably in the minority, but I always appreciate that with every season we actually get a new storyline that is completely voiced over. Voice talent is not cheap, so I always appreciate when we get new quest lines, new voice lines, new characters, things of that nature. I have to say, when it comes to Season 8, this one has been by far the shortest and the weakest. To be quite honest, I think story has been pitiful. This has been Belial, Lord of Lies. It's been such a wasted opportunity to have a lot more, intrigue, backstabbing, etc. It really feels like they didn't know where to take this, and it feels like they only wanted to introduce Belial as the new pinnacle boss, and the story was just an afterthought, which, you know what? Fair enough. But I'm definitely someone who takes notice of these things and someone who does appreciate them. For example, I think Season 5 of Season of Hatred Rising was by far the best one, the biggest quality in terms of a seasonal story and voice acting and all the other assets, and I really appreciated that. So I was kind of like disappointed at the fact that it was so short and unremarkable in any way. But more than that, one thing that especially pissed me off is that, okay, so you made a very short story, it's fine, not everyone cares about that, but why are you forcing us to go through the same story with every single new character in the season if we want to unlock Belial on the map? Have you guys noticed that? Or am I just going crazy? Because if you create a new character and you power level them up to level 60, for example, you skip the seasonal thing entirely, and then you want to farm Belial, well, you can't. Well, I mean, that's not technically true. You can, but only if you join someone else's party. Because otherwise, the entrance is not available to you on the world map. You can't teleport to it. So you actually have to go through the same goddamn story over and over and over again, just so that you can actually solo farm Belial on that character. Why? Why was that necessary? I would much rather you made a better story, a longer story, have us play it once, and then opt out for any additional character. Why do you have to go through the same bullshit every single time so that I can unlock the Belial fight? I don't understand. Okay, now let's talk about the brunt of the season, the seasonal themes, the seasonal mechanics, powers, and all of that. So, as far as the boss powers are concerned, I quite like them. They're very flashy, they're good, they're impactful, you know, they have an impact. You can definitely make a build around them, revolving them, and in that sense, I feel that they're kinda just right on this scale of too powerful and not enough power. And I think going forward, this is what seasonal powers should be doing. You know, if we already have them, they should be impactful. And of course, they're not as good as Season 7, but they come pretty close to me. I like the fact they have a modifier and they have a main boss power, so we can kind of mix and match. So definitely a big fan of that. Now, let's talk about Incursions. Incursions are ass. I don't like them. They're so bad, they're boring. Like, if we're going to compare this activity to the Witch Tides from the last season, they do not even begin to compare. They're just absolute trash. I'm sorry to be so harsh, but it's true. Like, I do not like these Incursions one bit. Next to the story, definitely the worst thing in this season, bar none. On my notes here, I call them a nothing burger because that's exactly what they are. I feel like, why would you go through them? Like, okay, you have to collect these bosses and their powers. Sure, the second that you do, that's it. If you want to farm the seasonal currency, you can just kill bosses, you can kill Belial, so it's gonna give you far more than that. It's gonna give you far more reputation and more currency. There's zero incentive for you to engage in the system. Not only that, but I found Incursions to be ridiculously laggy, especially at the beginning of the season when I was trying to get through my season journey. These Incursions were so laggy and they were making my life miserable that I had to partake in that system. You know, I definitely did not like them one bit. I guess one good thing that I can say about these kind of Incursions, they are a solid way to get whispers. That's it. That's the only compliment I can pay them. Other than that, they're just bad. I will pay Blizzard compliments for the way they handle reputation in Season 8. I like the season rep for bosses. Also kind of brings up other activities that are otherwise not nearly as good. For example, Infernal Hordes, the Aether Lords, which I actually ranked dead last on my Infernal Hordes ranking of all the modifiers, which you can actually check out as well if you want. So now Aether Lords are actually not that bad because they give you tons of reputation. The way that reputation was handled actually brings up other in-game activities, and it ties in well with other activities in general. I like that. And I think devs also confirmed that going forward they will continue to give reputation, seasonal reputation by killing bosses, and I think that's a good step forward for sure. And also, Oath Scroll, which came in at a later patch, is a huge quality of life change. Big fan of that. It makes farming sparks a lot easier by basically just converting all your currency into a reputation for your brand new character. And then you can get Resplendent Spark in that way. So, a big fan of that as well. Thumbs up from me. Okay, so I refuse to spend too much time talking about Reliquaries, but they were added in Season 8, so I have to spend at least a little bit of time talking about them, but I won't go too much into that because this is not the point of this video. But basically, I already talked about the issues Diablo 4 has with pretty aggressive and kind of scummy monetization practices, and you can definitely check this video out if you want. I will try to link it somewhere around here on the screen, we'll see. The point of these reliquaries, like, apparently, devs try to excuse them in the sense that they're gonna provide us with more choice, now we get to pick and choose what we want. In reality, they're bad, they're greedy, they do not come from a place of good. You're basically getting less value from your buck. And overall, I just think the excuses for that are absolutely pitiful. I do like the user interface, but that's pretty much the extent of what I like when it comes to these reliquaries, nothing else. And also, in this season, cosmetics were just bad. Whether the paid cosmetics or whether the free ones, they were just far inferior to Season 7 cosmetics. This character you see on the screen is using last season themes Witch Power cosmetics because in the live version they're just bad. It's just how it is. And that's it. That's the extent to which I will go into this. The only thing I will add to that is that I did purchase the new season pass in Season 8 because I had just enough leftover platinum, but going forward, I will no longer be doing that because we only get 200 as opposed to 800 that we used to get. Okay, that's it. I'm done. Alright, now let's talk about Lair Bosses. So they did a lot of good things by completely revamping the boss ladder system, so there are plenty of good things to talk about here. So definitely a step in the right direction. So bosses in general are no longer pushovers. You can expect, for example, the first tier of bosses are at least like 5 pit levels above Torment 4. Second tier is easily at least 10 pit levels above, and Belial is probably about 15 pit levels above Torment 4, even though you are fighting him in Torment 4. That's kind of like how I'm perceiving the difficulty, right? So if you're comfortably clearing, let's say, pit levels 70 plus, you shouldn't really struggle with bosses, but if you can barely clear Torment 4, the bosses are gonna kick your ass. So I like the fact that they are no longer pushovers, and I like the fact that now you kinda are forced to pay more attention, and they provide a bit of a bigger challenge. So not only the fact that they're no longer pushovers, they didn't just boost the stats, they also completely redesigned fight mechanics, and they also removed the stacking debuff where you take more damage. I always hated that, so I'm glad they did away with that. I will say, new bosses they introduced, the Harbinger of Hatred and Urivar, are pretty cool. Again, from my previous point, just using the existing assets and introducing them in a different way is a big thumbs up for me. Why not? They're already here in the game, so you might as well use them. I like that. I will say one side note on Urivar fight, he has this kind of a weird one-shot mechanic, which is not difficulty appropriate. Like, I remember playing throughout the season, and I would go into like Torment 2, Torment 3, I would crush the content, and then I would walk into Urivar, and he would just one-shot my ass. But I was beating Grigor and Varshan easily, so just something to consider, not really super balanced, but I like it. And then we also have Harbinger of Hatred fight, which is super unique, super engaging, you know, has all these interesting mechanics that are really cool. Although, if I have to say something bad, it's that it maybe lasts just a little bit long. It's just the nature of Diablo 4. This fight is going to be cool the first time, maybe the second time, the third time, but by the time you kill the dog Mephisto 10 times, it kind of starts to lose its appeal. So maybe it's just a little bit too protracted, in my opinion. TPing to the lair is fucking huge. 2 thumbs up from that. Like, honestly, this has been long overdue. Huge quality of life upgrade. Definitely a huge upgrade. Huge plus for me. Boss mats have been simplified, have been a lot more streamlined. So now it's a lot more clear what boss summons what. And also now we can stack mats higher and we need lower mats. And oh my god, the fact that we're no longer doing the boss rotation is so huge. The boss rotation was pissing me off so much. Now you need to have the materials to open the chest. Boss rotations were just so bad, and now this basically completely eliminated, you know, all these kind of concerns, whether I'm gonna farm solo or whether I'm gonna wait and try to stretch out my mats. Now you just go in, you kill the boss, and now there's also no way for you to actually waste your resources by summoning a boss that's too powerful, because you only spend mats after you kill him. So overall, huge wins, huge quality of life upgrades. Rotations in that sense are gone. No more people just going into the games and leeching. Now they have to open, and now they have to have the mats to participate. So overall, you know, just big wins when it comes to that. Now, I will say that the Andariel fight is still bad. Like, I've been playing this game for a lot now, and I still feel kind of lost in that fight. Like, there's so many shit happening on the screen at once. I don't understand why the Andariel fight has to be the way it is. I like the new Duriel fight, the way they redesigned it. I think it's cool. You know, you kind of understand what's happening. With Andariel, there's just so much shit. And she has like, what, 4 or 5 different immunity stages? Like, why? You know? That's a bad fight by any measure. And speaking of immunity phases, they are just bad. Like, I understand you don't want us to insta-shot bosses, but it is what it is. It's just the way, the game works. Like, you have bosses on Torment 4, but if you have builds that are pushing into the pits 90, those bosses are still going to get crushed. So these immunity phases are stupid, and they're just kind of an artificial way to create difficulty, which just ends up annoying the player. So in my opinion, they should absolutely be scrapped. Belial is kind of a good footprint on how this should work. Instead of immunity phases, just have him do different attacks, different things that he can do once a certain threshold is finished. And if we can still one-shot him, well, it is what it is. That's how you made the game, essentially, is what I'm saying. But anyway, immunity phases need to go out the window and into the trash. And also, I've been saying this, I've been shouting this from the rooftops since, Season 3, Season 4. Blizzard, please. You had a perfect opportunity this season when you were bringing up Boss Lair system to introduce the little anvil where we can just click and salvage all the shit that we don't need so that we don't have to go back in town, back and forth, Why didn't you do that? Like, I know that they know that that's what we want to do, but there are some of these things where Blizzard is so stubborn. Like, do they feel they're forcing us to interact with these items? Do they feel like it enriches the experience? Because it's anything but. Just the other day, I was solo farming Belial, and I should have taken a print screen on how the floor on that room looked like in the end. I killed Belial around 100 times, and I have around 300 different unique items that I don't need on the floor. It's bad. I just don't understand this decision. Same thing with the loot filter. Like, why is it not still in the game? Do they feel these trash items have value because we're forced to pick them up on the ground and then salvage them? Do they feel like they're creating this kind of an interesting gameplay loop by forcing us to go to the town to salvage this shit and then go back to killing the boss? It's just infuriating. Okay, so now let's talk about Belial as a boss. So first of all, great choice for a final boss on the boss ladder. Belial was a super cool boss, one of the coolest in Diablo 3. I don't mind them borrowing things that worked really well from previous games. Why not? And they definitely borrowed a lot from Diablo 3, and in my opinion, I have no issues with that. Diablo 3 is a great game. So Belial, pretty cool looking, great boss, no argument there. However, it's not without some issues. So first of all, this decision that they did, where you basically choose which boss he's going to emulate, I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. There's so many cooler, interesting things they could have done, but they decided to go that route. It honestly feels so gimmicky. You have this pinnacle boss, you have this kind of like the ultimate challenge, and then he drops nothing interesting and nothing exciting on his own. I feel like that cheapens the experience. I feel like that strips Belial from his identity and just makes him into kind of like a glorified token where, oh, I killed Belial and I'm gonna now emulate Beast of Ice drops. But what that also means is that I have zero incentive to do anything else. Why would I kill Beast of Ice, or why would I bother with Andariel that has like 10 immunity phases if I can just one-shot Belial and get better loot from Andariel than killing Andariel? This is a problem. So in my opinion, I feel Belial needs to have something unique and interesting to drop just for himself. Otherwise, you strip him and you rob him of his identity. But that's not even the biggest issue with Belial. The biggest issue is actually the fact that the masks to summon him are locked behind a random encounter. So you cannot even target farm materials for the final boss. That's a huge mistake. If you're still going to keep the same system, then at the very least the chance for this Belial, the mini Belial encounter should be at least, let's say, 50 to 60% as opposed to, let's say, maybe 5%, 10% that it is right now. And we also need another way of getting the husks. So as maybe, like for example, a drop from Whisper Caches or something else, there has to be more deterministic ways to get to Belial's fight by interacting with other things in the game, just like we do with other bosses, instead of just relying on something to happen. I think that's a bad game design. Now let's talk about some of the key changes they made regarding progression in Diablo 4 in Season 8. So first of all, I will say that Torment progression feels a lot better. Torment tiers feel more impactful. Whenever you go from Torment 1 to Torment 2 and 3 and 4, when you move to another tier, you definitely feel it. You know, there's a significant spike in difficulty. And that's good. That's how things should work. Now, personally, and I might be a minority opinion here, but I felt that during PTR for Season 8, I felt like the things were even better when they were a little bit more harder. Though I understand that not everyone feels like that, and there was actually quite a heavy backlash from the community. So I think ultimately that they did a good thing by bringing it down to the current difficulty, which is more accessible to most players. For instance, I got to Torment 4 with a suboptimal build, not even having all legendary nodes in my Paragon board unlocked as well. So currently, despite all this song and dance and talk about the difficulty, ultimately I believe everyone can make it in Torment 4 with almost any build. If that's the way the Blizz wants to keep things going forward, then that's fine. I don't mind that one bit, but then Torment 4 is definitely not aspirational content that they were talking about earlier. Personally, because this game kind of lacks the real challenge, you know, once you unlock Torment 4 and you start blasting it, maybe I would prefer the difficulty curve of the PTR, but I understand not everyone feels the same way. Alright, now let's talk about Ancestrals. So Ancestral drop rate in general got a lot better. My main complaint in the previous season of the Witchcraft, which was actually my favorite season to date, was that the legendaries were raining from the sky just a little bit too much. You would go to these quote-unquote witch tides, right? And then you would just go through, kill everything, kill all these objectives, you would unlock the caches, and 5 minutes in, your inventory would be filled to the brim. If not like 2 minutes in, you know? It was bad. And then you would have all these legendaries just kind of being dropped all over the ground. It was a mess. Season 8 definitely curbed that a little bit. Ancestrals definitely feel more valuable when you first find them because they're not, you know, as common as they used to be. Although, the same problem in the game still remains, is that once you get an ancestral item for your item slot, non-ancestral items cease to matter. They cease to exist, they are a complete trash. But I'll talk about that a bit later. As far as essential items are concerned, they buffed the Oboe Gambler from the previous season, in which they were trash. Now, gambling feels really nice. You can definitely get essential items a lot quicker, a lot easier, and a lot more often. However, despite all of that, I do have some complaints, in the sense that some activities feel less rewarding once you do them, because sometimes you just don't get a legendary even though you worked hard for that activity. And specifically on Torment 4 too. So what am I talking about? I would like to refer to the earlier mentioned fight with the Harbinger of Hatred. It's super cool and involved and everything, but the problem is, the first issue I came across when I was playing through the season for the first time, I finally unlocked Torment 4, and I was doing, you know, these group runs for the Harbinger of Hatred, and the fight is cool and everything, and it lasts for a while, especially if it's your first time engaging with those mechanics. It can take up to several minutes, you know, if you don't know what you're doing. And then you open the chest, and you get 0 Ancestrals. And that's a bummer. That's a real bummer, because as I mentioned earlier, non-ancestral legendaries are trash. Once you replace them with Ancestrals, non-ancestral items are garbage. Period. And so, essentially, what you get is you open a chest from one of the biggest bosses in the biggest difficulty, and you get garbage. That's what it is. It just doesn't feel rewarding. And you go through this difficult fight, or maybe just lengthy. It doesn't have to be difficult, depending on where you are at the season. And you don't get rewarded. You don't feel like your efforts were rewarding. So I would propose Torment 4 bosses should always drop at least 1 Ancestral. There's this balance between making them rain and not having them enough. Like in most things in the game and in life, balance is key. So if you get through this activity, that should be like an endgame activity, it should reward you appropriately. So at the very least, 1 guaranteed Ancestral, these boss caches, you know, is something that I would personally do. Because otherwise, these fights just don't feel rewarding. It feels kind of like a slap in the face. And I had also similar issues with Hell Tides as well. Like, for example, you had these mystical chests. I think there are 275 cinders. Depending on your build, early in the season, you know, it can take you a while to reach that point. And I'm still talking about Torment 4 here, by the way. You go to Torment 4, you open this big chest that you worked your ass for. You don't start with these builds in the beginning of the season, you know, where you can just one-shot content. That's something you work your way towards. So as you're going through the season, you open this big chest and you get 0 Ancestrals. That still kind of feels bad. I wish these kind of big, large milestones would need to have at least one guaranteed Ancestral item. And now let's talk about Mythics. So first of all, I love that Mythic items are rare. They are the most valuable drops, they are the most valuable items, the strongest items in the game, and they should feel rare. I think this is the first season in which the drop rate of Mythics has been just right. Mwah. Chef's kiss. So, hard to attain, but still attainable. For example, Belial on average, like every, let's say, 50 kills is a Mythic. Other bosses, like 1 out of 100 or something like that, which is, again, reasonable considering how powerful these items are. However, not all of these Mythics are the same, right? Some of them you're super excited to get. It advances your build, like let's say Shaco or the Shroud, you know, or the Arrow of Perdition, you know, Starless Skies, you know, these are the top 4 and they elevate pretty much almost any build. And you're super happy to get them. And then what happens is you have some that are just trash. Unfortunately, currently in the game we have Mythic Uniques that are trash. For example, the Spear that nobody ever fucking uses, that gives you Shrine effects. Or, last season, I got 4 GA Shattered WoW. The problem with that weapon is like, it's a 4 GA Mythic, you know, I should be exalted, I should be happy, and instead, I was debating whether should I salvage it because it's trash, or whether should I keep it if they rework the item for the future. So I did end up keeping it, you know, just in case something happens one day that makes it viable. It's a shame to salvage a 4 GA Mythic Unique, but that's the issue. These items being so rare and powerful means that every one of them should be useful, but right now, that's obviously not the case. The Shattered WoW is trash, the Spear is trash, and the Amulet is also trash. And quite frankly, Andariel's, it was good a couple seasons ago when there were legit builds behind that item, but now it's also trash. So having like half of the items in this exalted tier of items being so rare and so powerful, having them just be trash and just being an instant salvage doesn't feel good. So a rework of these items is necessary. Now other than that, one thing I would love to point out is not just the mythics themselves, but how you actually craft them. So even though mythic items are still fairly attainable, you know, ultimately you're going to be wanting to craft them yourself because you're going to be receiving all these sparks throughout the season, whether it's the season journey, whether it's killing Lilith, which you can do in Torment 1, by the way, you know, just a little tip, or whether it's to reputation farming. You're going to be having access to these sparks, and for some people, that's going to be their only reliable way to get mythic uniques. So what happens then? Then, to craft an item, you need 6 legendary runes, 6 rare runes, and 6 magic runes. For the magic and rare runes, you can find them, you know, eventually you can, or you can maybe trade them, but the legendary runes are a severe bottleneck for, I will say, any casual player. And they are a severe bottleneck for every solo self-found player. They're such a bottleneck to the point that if you're playing solo self-found without trading or engaging with other people, you're just not going to find them. I watched Rob's video a couple of days ago, where basically he said that without trading, he would have never been able to get enough arm runes to create, you know, a mythic. And let me remind you who we're talking about here. He already had Paragon 300 at the time of making of that video. He already had 200 plus hours in. He's one of the biggest grinders of this game on the planet. He plays it for a living. So if Rob isn't getting enough runes to craft a mythic unique without trading, you're not going to be able to do the same either. That's what I'm telling you. Ideally, these prices for these legendary runes should be 1/3. For example, 2 legendary runes, 2 rares, 2 magic runes. That way, it makes it more reasonable for players who don't want to trade with others, who don't want to spend billions of gold on these runes, to craft the mythics that they actually need. And also, speaking of runes, perhaps a system to craft them deterministically is what this game needs. Like in Diablo 2, if you have 3 of the lesser rune, you put it into a Tragic Cube and you craft the higher tier of runes. And as you go further up, you only need 2 runes to craft the higher tier, etc. Something like this should be in Diablo 4. a deterministic way for us to actually craft these runes ourselves. Or to craft anything, really. Crafting has always been one of the weakest points of Diablo 4. Alright guys, so with all that out of the way, now it's time to talk about some lingering issues that continue to plague the game 2 years in. Again, I only promised you my honest thoughts, no sugarcoating, no anything. This is just, the way things are. And there are some very key issues here that we kind of have to talk about if we actually wanting to make the game better. So first of all, key systems like tempering, enchanting, and masterworking are still incredibly frustrating to deal with. I'll talk a little bit about that during the PTR portion, but obviously it's going to be far worse in the live version where you continuously have to grind for all these materials. Thankfully, they kind of figured it out, so now it's only really, the masterworking mats and the gold which are the bottleneck. But the materials themselves are never, the real issue. It's the RNG nature of all of these mechanics. It's the fact that you can actually break a very powerful item and then you can just, go fuck yourself. Like, it's useless to you. I don't like that. During the season of the Loot Reborn, these systems in place right now are so much better than what we used to have. But it's time. It's time to make them even better. Like, we've been at this for a long time now, and the community has continuously suggested improvements on this matter season after season, but the devs don't seem to listen, don't seem to care, or maybe they just don't have the time to do it. But these systems in the current state of things are incredibly frustrating. So for example, tempering. Now they made it so that the UI screen remembers your category for tempers, so at least we have this small quality of life improvement, but this ultimately doesn't matter. If you can break a valuable item, like let's say 2 GA, 3 GA item that you paid like maybe 20, 30, 50 billion gold for, the fact that you can break it, even with the scroll of restoration, is absolutely insane. So my proposal is actually quite simple. Either make it like enchanting so that we can actually pick between two tempers, or, maybe the best solution will simply be to be able to continuously re-roll the tempers, of course at a certain pricey cost. Make the scroll of restoration may be extra rare, or make it restore less tempers but make it extra rare. Make some system where breaking of the items should not be possible, right? I think that's an extremely bad game mechanic. Enchanting, incredibly frustrating to do. The Blizzard doesn't admit it, but if you engage with the system like for more than 5 minutes, you know that there are weights. Some affixes are weighted more than others. You're going to be trying to get a passive on your amulet. Well, good fucking luck with that, because instead you're gonna get life, you're gonna get increased strike chance, you're gonna get resistances. You're not gonna get what you need for like a fucking hour, until, your brain turns into mush. Yeah, you've been there, I've been there. It's incredibly frustrating to deal with. So someone suggested somewhere that I fully agree with. Put these enchants in different categories, especially for amulets, where it's the most frustrating. Like, have passives be in one category. Have stats like max life, armor, resistances in category B, for example. And then we can switch. If you just want to roll for the passives, allow me to just roll in that category. That way, it's going to severely diminish the frustration of that system. And finally, masterworking. There's absolutely zero reason for it to work the way it works right now. If we already crit what we wanted to, allow us to save it, for God's sake. Increase the penalties, increase the cost, that's all. You will find that players don't mind grinding for something as long as they know they're gonna get it. Grinding for Obdusite, but without knowing whether you're gonna hit that double or triple crit on the item, is extremely frustrating. That's not a good game experience. You're just artificially prolonging the gameplay loop. You're not actually making the gameplay longer in the actual sense of the word, you're just making it more frustrating. I don't understand why Blizzard still can't understand that. Make the cost, tenfold if necessary, I don't care, but if I crit something and I wish to keep it, I should be able to do so. My second point here is lack of the real endgame. I'm not gonna waste too much time talking about that. I already made several videos about that. Listen, currently the only real endgame we have is the pit. What is the endgame? Let's talk about that first. Endgame is something that you can do once you fully maxed out your gear, essentially. It's a content that's challenging, that's repeatable, and that's rewarding, right? So currently only the pit kind of fits that bill in a sense that it's challenging and repeatable, but the rewarding aspect is not there. And I think, Rob was talking about that as well in his videos. If you can crush pit 80, but you can also crush Pit 110. You don't really have any incentive to go Pit 110. We're going to be seeing finally leaderboards later down the line, so that's going to allow more competitive players to at least have a reason to engage with the higher levels of the pit. In the meantime, other than that, you don't really have a reason, and you don't really have any other endgame. For example, things like Hordes, Undercity, Nightmare Dungeons, they're all decent activities in the game that are pretty good for you while you're getting your character to a certain point, but past that point, they become extremely trivial. The content becomes trivial. You cannot in good faith call these activities a real endgame. You just can't. That's just kind of my opinion about that. You know, I talked already a lot about that in my previous videos, so I'm trying not to sound like a broken record. Other content creators have already made videos about what potential endgame could be. A special shout out to Riker here with his tree suggestion. I really love that because not only is it thematically in theme with Diablo 4, but also like it ties in all these different activities together. Obviously, it doesn't have to be one-to-one replica. This is just a suggestion, an idea. Like, we should do something similar in spirit. You know, it doesn't have to be like the exact thing. Anyway, that's kind of like where I'm standing as far as the lack of the endgame is concerned. And I already talked about, like, Nightmare Dungeons could have had such a potential to really carry the game and create another endgame. But what I did in Season 9, it's just not it. It's just a little embellishment of the current system, nothing else. And now, guys, we have to talk about some things that are ultimately the crux of these entire issues. So, there is, in my opinion, a perceived lack of will and ambition to propel the game forward and make sweeping and ambitious changes. In Season 7, we got the powers, great. In Season 8, we got some more powers with some core changes to the gameplay. In Season 9, we got even more powers and with some other core changes in the gameplay. But these changes are just not good enough. They're not big enough, they're not ambitious enough, they don't propel the game forward. It's like taking something that has a crack, but instead of, you know, fixing the crack, you're just kind of dusting it off. You're polishing it to make it appear a little bit cleaner and prettier, but the crack is still there. And that's kind of how I feel. When I saw the roadmap for the first time, like, I was kind of, have to say, really underwhelmed by that. Other people have described that Diablo 4 is in the maintenance mode, and honestly, I agree with that. I think since Season 7 and above, Diablo 4 has indeed been in the maintenance mode because they don't have any real drive to continue to work on the game, to continue to make some actual, real, ambitious changes, which Escalating Nightmare Dungeons are not. That's not an ambitious change. It's a small change you make just for the sake of making something, for the sake of saying that, oh, okay, we did that, you know. That's not gonna cut it. Especially not right now when you have Path of Exile 2, you have Last Epoch with a tremendous new season, you have, you know, No Rest for the Wicked, you even have Path of Exile 1 still cooking. In this space, the ARPG space has never been more competitive, and this is not the way you go forward. It's just not. I will talk a little bit more about that in the third chapter where I talk about where I actually see the future in the game. But before I do, there's one final point that I have to discuss here, which is right here, red, big, bold, underlined. It says, botting and duping. Oh boy, where do I begin? So the botting and duping has been a persistent problem in this game since basically the time it came out. And it's been something that Blizzard never refused to directly acknowledge. You know, maybe they think that by not talking about it, by pretending it doesn't exist, that we're not gonna be, you know, any wiser. But that couldn't be further from the truth. First of all, don't get me wrong, like, I know they're aware of these issues, and I'm sure they're doing what they can in the background all the time to take care of it. I'm not saying they're not, but what I am saying is that we're 2 years into the game right now, and things have never been worse. That's what I'm saying. Whatever they're doing, they're not doing enough. Let me actually explain what I'm talking about. So, you release Season 8, okay? You rework the new layer system, right? And you lock the final boss behind a random encounter that drops like maybe 5-10% of the time. So realistically, how often do you expect to get with the Belial fight? Not too often, right? Like, maybe if you've been like Rob, you have 300 Paragon, you've been blasting 12 hours a day. Like, maybe I can see you having 200, 300, 400 husks. If you're that like of a blaster, sure. What happened instead is, 1 week into the season, we had people already selling 10,000 husks on Diablo.trade. 10,000. If you do the math just a little bit, you understand immediately how impossible that actually is. There's only one logical conclusion, and that is that players have somehow managed to dupe these husks 2 years into the game, and we still have this issue, but now it's compounded. Because of the nature of the new system, this is not just like duping a high rune and getting more gold. No. The problem with that is that Belial fight, if you have unlimited materials, Belial fight is too good. The game is not designed for that in mind, that you can blast, Belial 10,000 times in one sitting. It's designed as something that you can do maybe 10 times, and then you're forced to farm the bosses over and over again to engage in the rest of the game and then to do it again, right? That's how the devs designed it, but because you can just fucking dupe that shit, you can bypass the entirety of the game, you can skip every other system in the game, and you can just do one thing. So let me just give you a quick rundown of why that harms the game and what that actually does for the game in general. So when you're farming Belial, first of all, you're selecting your own boss drops. So if you're farming for something specific, you have zero incentive to ever visit that boss again. Second of all, you get insane amounts of reputation. Third of all, you get insane amounts of seasonal currency, and you get insane amounts of uniques and materials in general. It basically solves everything, right? You get unique items, you get them a lot more, you have the best chance of getting a mythic. It's just overall the best activity in the game, and because they designed it the way they did, why would you ever farm Warshan? Why would you ever do Helltides to go, farm Grigor? You don't have to, because you can just go to Belial, kill him, select Grigor, and the drop is gonna be like 2 times better. You see where I'm going with this? Duping has always been persistent in Diablo 4, but in Season 8, because of these changes to the Lair Bosses, they're infinitely worse. And if you think for a second that, this doesn't apply to you, you're wrong. The duping messes with the entire system, all systems in the economy. As I already explained, even if you're solo self-found, you're still going to be forced to engage with the system, at least when it comes to the runes for your mythics. At least that. If you're 100% solo self-found, I guess that doesn't apply to you. But for 99% of players, this does apply. Because this affects the value of absolutely everything in the game. This affects the value of in-game gold. This affects the value of items that drop by Belial and everything. And Belial can drop every unique. 1 week into the game, having people already selling 10,000 of these husks completely fucks up the game economy permanently. And the fact that we're dealing with this after 2 years, to me, quite frankly, is unacceptable. It's just not acceptable. This is an online-only game. If this was a single-player game where, people can somehow figure out the client, and the files, like they have in Diablo 2, for example, I will give them maybe more benefit of a doubt. But for those of you who don't remember, Diablo 3 was an online-only game, and it received considerable backlash because it was the first game in the series back in a time where online-only games were not, nearly as prominent as they are today. One of the devs' kind of counterpoints why it's always online is so they can kind of easily target the duping and the botting and the cheating that was prevalent in Diablo 2 at the time, and it still is. And then we fast forward 15 years later, we have an online-only game, but the botting and duping has never been worse. The husks are a duper's wet dream. It's a material that's so essential to a core game activity, and by doing that one activity, you basically have zero incentive to do anything else, because it gives you everything. It's too good. And then you only have to dupe that one specific thing, and you're done. And, ultimately, like, we could talk about balance, we could talk about progression, we could talk about lack of endgame systems, whatever, but this is the core issue right now during the making of this video. The duping. That's the number one issue. I never see them talk about it in any of these campfire chats, and if anyone asks, they just straight up ignore it, they play dumb with it. I know they know, but a little bit of acknowledgement, recognizing the community does have a problem with this, would be nice. It would be nice for them not to treat us like idiots, like, sorry guys, we know it's happening, we're trying our best. At the very least, something of that nature. But to be honest, this is not acceptable. 2 years in, having this situation that it screws up economy completely is just Not acceptable. And now for my last point on the video on things that I wanted to discuss and talk about, the future of Diablo 4. The future of the game, and more specifically, where I believe it is actually heading. It's sometimes easy to forget that Diablo 4 has had quite a journey, and it took a lot of time for the game to finally find itself and its identity. Diablo 4 that you might have played in the first 3 seasons is almost completely unrecognizable from the game today, and for the better. It all started with Season 4, aka the Season of the Loot Reborn, where systems like tempering and masterworking were first introduced, and they completely changed up the endgame progression of items in the game. Further seasons added even more improvements. And then, if Season 4 laid the groundwork for what Diablo 4 would become, Season 6 and 7 would kind of set it in stone. In Season 6, we got rid of the world tier system in favor of torments, and we designed the Paragon. And in Season 7, we had a return of seasonal powers once again, heavily inspired by Season 2's vampiric powers, which is often considered to be the most successful season of all time. These are all massive and sweeping changes that the game needed. But then suddenly, it felt as if the changes stopped. About 2 months ago, we got the first Diablo 4 roadmap for the entire 2025, and to say that the roadmap was underwhelming would be an understatement. I made an entire video about the roadmap, so I won't go too much deep into it, but you can clearly see the pattern. No more big and bold changes, of Season 4, Season 6, that the game actually needs. Just copy and paste instead. Their philosophy is clear. Every new season, we get a new season theme, with new seasonal powers and an improvement of one of the core gameplay activities. Now, this sounds good on paper, but if you take a bit of a closer look, there is a lot of issues with that approach. When they announced that they would be revamping the Nightmare Dungeons in Season 9, I was actually really excited because I always thought that Nightmare Dungeons have some of the best potential in the game. They have a lot of variety, and with some core changes they can absolutely serve as a strong endgame activity to carry the endgame for Diablo 4. But that's not at all what we were getting. Sure, Escalating Dungeons sound like fun, but as I already talked about, they hardly even escalate. And it's just another Tournament 4 content that will eventually be outclassed by our characters. This was the perfect time to completely overhaul the Nightmare Dungeon system. And I will give you an example that I already talked about. When you think about ordinary dungeons in the game, when do you ever visit them? They're completely useless, and they're not even the best way to get whispers. So how about we make every dungeon into a Nightmare Dungeon by default on Torment difficulties? Then, every hour, let's say 10 random dungeons would be chosen to be empowered across the map. Doing these dungeons would provide an extra reward, but also with an increase in difficulty. And then, we could also have the option to further juice up the dungeons with the sigils. These sigils could vary in tiers, like for example magic, rare, legendary, and unique sigils. With unique sigils being extremely rare and increasing the difficulty of the dungeon at least tenfold. These changes would do several things. They would encourage interaction with locations around the map, increasing the variety of activities, reduce the clutter of sigils in the stash, and on top of all of that, provide additional layer of an actual endgame. Hell, we could even include the escalation mechanic, but instead of just stopping at 3 tiers, how about we chain together 10 super strong dungeons? See, now that is something that would excite me. But instead of all of that, we just got the option to do 3 dungeons together and a new dungeon boss. And that is exactly what I'm talking about, the lack of will and ambition to make some real sweeping changes to the game, instead of just tweaking a couple of things and calling it a day. That's just not good enough. And don't even get me started on the fact that in the season where we're making the Nightmare Dungeon sigils better, we're still not getting a whisper info on the sigils to tell us which one is a whisper and when it expires. That's just not acceptable. Now let's talk about seasonal powers for a moment. It's not that I have a problem with the seasonal powers per se. They've all been really fun, They've all been well designed, for the most part, looked super cool, and they served to add more flavor and depth to the base game. More customizability and increasing the number of ways to play, which are all great things. But the thing is, boss powers are a crutch. If your foot hurts, you need a crutch to help you walk until it heals back again. And then you get rid of the crutch. Boss powers really expose the vulnerabilities of the current skill system in the game. The base skill tree for all classes needs a massive overhaul. Some ARPGs, for instance, like Titan's Quest, have an entire skill tree dedicated for just one specific skill. And one of my favorite parts of Diablo 3 were the skill runes, where you could choose up to 5 different runes for every skill, and each affecting how it behaves, often changing the damage type, element, how it looks, feels, and plays completely. In Diablo 4 though, you pick a skill, and then you pick an upgrade to that skill, and then you choose between skill variant A or skill variant B. And I just don't think that's enough for an ARPG in 2025. But ultimately, I have come to a realization. After seeing the roadmap and the way that it's being implemented, after participating in this PTR for Season 9 and everything, I realized something that I suspected for a long time now. Once the Vessel of Hatred released, it felt the devs finally found a formula that they are comfortable with. Maybe even too comfortable. And then the roadmap release and the devs' unwillingness to continue to improve the game in any substantial way has only confirmed my suspicions, and that is, when it comes to Diablo 4, what you see is what you get. And I don't mean this in any sort of negative, defeatist, pessimistic kind of way either. I'm just being real with y'all. In the intro of the video, I only ever promised to be straight with you, nothing more and nothing less. So yeah, I am officially done with hoping for more than what we will get. Now, would it be nice to have a similar endgame system like Path of Exile? Of course. Or a skill system similar to one from Titan's Quest, for example? Absolutely. Will any of these happen in any way, shape, or form? No. Let's get something straight. I think Diablo 4 is a great game, and I love it. I wouldn't be doing any of this if this was not the case. I wouldn't be spending dozens upon dozens of hours into every video, making build guides and trying to grow a community behind this game if I didn't love it in the first place. The only problem is that it has every potential to be not great, but amazing. But there's just a lack of will, drive, motivation for Blizzard to make this happen. It's frustrating, but I have chosen to accept that. And a strong motivation behind why I have decided to make this video in the first place is exactly that. It's a form of acceptance for me. A catharsis, if you will. My way of saying that I am done pretending that Diablo 4 will ever be more than what it is. So to bring the video to a close, and on a more positive note, let's talk about what comes next. Next year, there will be another major expansion, and I'm sure we're gonna get more news a few months from now, with a new class that will very likely be a Paladin. We all love Paladin, and I'm sure it's going to be so fun. With a new expansion, of course, we're also very likely to get a new act for us to play with, new monsters and activities, all of which have me very excited. So, to summarize, the future of the game is still very bright. Just curb your expectations. If you already love the game and you think it's fun, then what's coming on the horizon is going to be really great and exciting for you. If, on the other hand, you gave up on Diablo 4 a long time ago, and you're waiting for it to turn into something else, don't bother. If you want the depth of Path of Exile, play Path of Exile. If you want some cool skill customization of Titan's Quest, play Titan's Quest. Or any of the other games in the space. Because if the core of the game does not appeal to you right now, then no amount of future expansions, acts, and classes will convince you to play. As for me personally, I still love Diablo 4, and whatever happens in the future, I will be here for the ride. Thank you so much for sticking around with this long-ass video and watching my overview of the game and the future it's heading into. If you want more of Diablo content and you appreciate my efforts, consider subscribing, as it helps me out tremendously and motivates me to do more of this. I'm Fallen Messiah, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.